Welcome back to the Shield Army. We are so glad that you are tuning in with us today. I'm Chaplain Hughes. I'm here with Chaplain Potter and Chaplain Stephenson. And right now we are in a series on relationships. And the last episode, we talked about friendship, what that looks like, God's design for that. We talked about how the enemy a lot of times can step in and try to make the worst of friendships. We talked about boundaries. We talked about a lot of good stuff when it comes to friendships. But today, we want to go a little bit different direction, and we want to talk specifically about workplace relationships. That's a big deal, especially within the police and dispatch communities, even in the fire EMS communities. I mean, it's the bottom line is that you live and work with people all the time, and so we want to talk about what that looks like. And so we thought we would try to hit a couple of different things today. We want to talk about workplace relationships, specifically with coworkers, people we work side by side and arm in arm with every day. We want to talk about relationships with our supervisors, with our command staff. We're gonna talk about all those things and how that looks. So, guys, let's get this thing kicked off and kind of see where it takes us.
Yep. All right, let's do it.
So as we look at relationships, one of the things we got to realize is that there's a couple different categories. We've talked about some of those relationships in terms of coworker or peer. That would be defined as someone that we work with, our buddies, if you will, the people that are on the same platoon, the same rotation. Supervisors be our sergeants, right? Those that are one above us. And then we have the command staff, those that lieutenants, the supervision, the much like our command staff is what we would think of. In all relationships, though, in terms of just zooming out, there's healthy and there's unhealthy relationships.
Oh, yeah,
absolutely.
And we have examples of a lot of those, right? We have examples of healthy relationships, and then we have a lot of examples of unhealthy, and we'll probably unpack some of those a little bit later. But before we get into any of that, this may surprise you, but did you know that God has designed friendship and God has designed this thing called relationship?
Are you serious?
Absolutely. One of my favorite verses in James, it says, every good and perfect gift comes down from the Father of lights. And as we all know, a good friend is an amazing gift in your toughest, darkest of hours. We also look early on in Scripture at how this idea that we're created for community. We're all created to have intimate, deep relationships to guide and direct us through stuff. And there's commands in Scripture for us to even lay our burdens down, not only at the foot of the cross, but to share them with our community, with our friends. So there's an extreme power and there's a design for friendship and for coworkers.
And we certainly have plenty of examples throughout the Scriptures of a variety of relationships, and those that worked well and those that maybe didn't work so well.
Yeah. We think of David and Jonathan, right? Two warriors in their own right, and they were able to work together. They were able to be coworkers. They were able to dive through many different battles, both mentally, physically, and spiritually.
Yep.
Yeah, think about that specific verse from Proverbs 27:6, where it says, faithful are the wounds of a friend. Mm-hmm. You know, people that you can trust, that you can call friends, because even when they say things that are difficult, you can trust them.
Yep.
You know, even if it's hard for you to take in and digest what's coming your way, those type of friends are the ones that you want. The ones that, I know we're going to unpack the healthy versus unhealthy thing, but the healthy friends that you can trust the things that they're saying, even if they're hard things for you to have to take in.
Yeah, people that have that relational equity in your life, somebody that has a seat at your table that says, hey, man, here's what I'm seeing. Those wounds you can absolutely trust. Let's start with some healthy. Let's describe the good. When we're looking at relationships, again, both coworker, supervisor, command staff, there are things in a relationship that would define it as healthy. What are some of those things?
I think one of the things that we can talk about and we can all agree on is that healthy relationships can be seen amongst people who have grace with one another, right?
Oh, yeah.
People that you can extend a hand of grace to somebody. Like a coworker may, let's just face it, we all make good and bad decisions, right? And, and a coworker may be somebody you really trust, but maybe one day, maybe there's one particular thing that happens and you think, man, that was probably not a good decision. Or you immediately know that was not something that should have happened. But at the end of the day, you can go to that person, you can say, look, hey, this is that wounds from a friend can be trusted, right? You can go to them and you can say that. But at the same token, you don't write them off because they make a bad decision in that moment or whatever, but you extend a hand of grace to them and say, look, this is something we can learn from. We're going to figure out real quickly that we probably shouldn't do that again.
Yep.
But we're going to work through this, and we're going to come out better on the other side because of what happened.
I hear you say that, but I dare say we've probably all seen times where guys have kind of written off people pretty quickly, that grace hasn't been extended. How do we? Can we park here for a minute and just hit on that?
I think we need to, specifically with grace. Grace defined would be a forgiveness or a pardon that somebody doesn't deserve. That's the definition. That's the down and dirty definition of that. In law enforcement specifically, and me and Adam have dabbled in the fire and EMS world, so we have a little experience in that community. Law enforcement really struggles, and I believe our veterans would be the same, those that serve in active duty status. Grace is not something that they drip with. They don't have a great abundance of grace. And I think of situations early on in officers' careers where they make very dumb decisions, whether it's on the job, off the job, whatever it could be. And that label is applied to that officer or that individual for the rest of their life. And they're pretty much written off. Or you will hear a story, and Scripture says, out of the overflow of your heart, your mouth speaks. And so you will start to hear people's heart, and as they talk about other people, they will say, yeah, well, he did blank.
Yeah.
And I start to ask, so how long ago was that? Oh, that was 6 years ago. What? Have they done that since then? Well, no. So you wrote this person off and you didn't extend grace. Grace is not saying that what they did was okay. Grace is putting a covering over that and moving on with that. A healthy relationship certainly should have grace in that. I think our constituents, our people, if you will, the law enforcement world, have such a high stakes job that if you don't do your job right, if I'm going in a call with you and you do not do something correctly, I don't get to go home to my family because of that. And so that does breed a tension that I think is reasonable, but I think it moves over to relationships.
I had a conversation with an officer recently. I was in their car, and they said something to me when we were talking about this very thing. We were having a conversation about a relationship, and they said to me they struggle because they do see the very worst of people because of what they do. And instead of just allowing that to affect them with the general population, they've allowed that to affect how their relationships are with their coworkers. And because of that, there's one particular coworker that this officer was talking about that they struggle with because of some decisions they made. And I actually asked that officer that same question that you just brought up. I actually said, has that happened again? And they looked at me and said, no. And I said, so you're still holding that one thing against them that they've only done that one time. And I get what you're saying and what they say, that at the end of the day, their decisions determine whether I go home or not. But this particular instance did not. You know, but their fear is what if it got to that point, But I had to remind them, I said, you got to remember, like, man, they are human just like you are, and you could have found yourself in the same position that they would have been in. And you, while you have 20/20 vision right now because you're looking at what happened then, what if the tables had been turned and you would have found yourself in a situation you hope you would have done the right thing? But what if you hadn't? Would you have wanted them to extend grace to you if you had been the person standing in their shoes?
Yeah, you just hit the nail on the head for me, because if we can take time to do that, all of us want to be the recipient of grace. When we all mess up, we all fall short at times, and as much as I love the officers that we serve, and I know you all do too, but there's not a perfect one out there. Right. And in fact, there's not a perfect chaplain around this table right now as well. Right. We all want to be the recipient of grace, and yet, would we measure up to the standard that we're trying to apply to somebody else? Would we measure up in that same way? Depending on when you if you're watching my life 24/7, at some point, I'm going to let you down. And, these men and women that are your coworkers, some of these men and women are spending a great deal of time in the field together, or working a case in the office, whatever the case may be. With that many hours, that many days, months and years serving together, there's going to be times when that person lets you down in some way. But we have to remember there's times when you are going to let the others down as well. So how do we extend that grace? What is that? Can we unpack that? Like, what does that look like to realistically try to practically make that happen?
So I read a book here several years ago now at this point called Peacemakers. And one of the, I guess, decision trees that they would say in that book of how to make decisions and how to give grace and how to extend forgiveness. The first question that I ask is this thing that I have to choose to give grace or forgiveness over, is that something that I can overlook? Is it a life safety issue? Is it that big? I know what it feels like to me. It feels very frontal. It feels like it's the biggest deal in my life. But is this life or death? Is this serious? If the person is just grumpy and mouthed off to you, yeah, that hurts and they shouldn't have done that. Maybe we just overlook that. We don't know what's going on inside of their life. We don't know what has happened the night before. We have no clue on that. And grace would say, I choose to look past that. That's what that means. If there's something that I look at and I go, that is a big deal. That right there will end up with somebody getting hurt, with me getting hurt, something like that. I can't overlook that. I don't need to have grace for that. What I do need to is graciously and gently begin to interact with that and say, hey, here's what I'm seeing. Can we talk about this?
That's so good. Again, we're talking about coworkers. We're talking about the peer-to-peer coworker relationships. Doesn't mean you have to see eye to eye on every little detail about life, right? But if there is something that we are starting to see a pattern, and it's something that is detrimental either to that individual or a group, a zone, whatever the case may be, yeah, we have to interact with that. We have to, it's part of being a responsible coworker, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So I read something a while back and I just pulled it up because I want to make sure that I said it just like I read it, because I thought it was such, it was very profound. And that's particularly what we're talking about right now. And let me just read it. This pastor, Craig Rochelle, said it this way. He said, being offended is inevitable. Living offended is a choice. Mm-hmm. If you are on a continuous search to be offended, you'll always find what you're looking for. Remember, the calling ahead of you is greater than the offenses behind you. Yep. I thought, man, that's such a good word. And it's so good for us to think about, because there's always going to be something that happens, right? But how we respond to it, we can't control what other people do, but we absolutely can control what we do as a response.
Absolutely. In thinking about this and kind of sliding towards the next couple topics, we probably could do a whole episode on grace, because, again, our community, the men and women we serve, that is a topic of great concern from a chaplain's heart, that we feel and we see and we experience the lack of grace for each other, for coworker to coworker. Maybe we'll hit that at a little bit later date, but let's continue on this track of trying to talk about what a healthy relationship looks like. If we realize that God has designed this thing, there is a good reason for it, there has to be a healthy carbon copy of what a relationship looks like. We've talked about it. It needs to be grace-filled. I think it needs to be a good, healthy relationship has to have healthy boundaries. I don't think a relationship, coworker now, I don't think we can just have willy-nilly boundaries. I think there are no-go zones. I think there are areas in people's lives where we don't touch, right? I think there are personality. There's things that part of being a good friend is that I'm going to know the weaknesses of my coworker. I'm going to know the things that sets them off. I'm going to know the things that hurt and wound them, that distract them. An appropriate boundary would be, just because I'm frustrated, I don't need to flick that. I don't need to hurt them. I don't need to step into that area of their life.
Yeah, and I see, we've all seen it, and we've probably been guilty at times
Sure.
of it when we see something going on with a coworker, and we just kind of start picking and jabbing, and because we're getting a response out of them, and some of that's just having good fun, however, there is a line there, right? That there's some things that ought to be kind of, a no-go zone. Like we're not going to cross that line. And when we're talking about the really personal things, when we know somebody has gone through a bad breakup after a long relationship, or maybe a divorce, or those kind of things, or things that are intensely personal, and we run in these circles where there's a lot of dark humor and there's a lot of joking around and jabbing, but some of those areas are places we just don't need to go.
Yeah.
If I touch that area, is that going to help them grow in that area, or is it just going to hurt them?
Yeah.
And I definitely think in the law enforcement community, one of the major, I think, Darren, you were headed that direction. One of the major areas we see this become a real problem is, let's just face it, the law enforcement, first responder community, the dark humor side of things that they all live on because of what they see and what they do, and trying to maintain, that healthy mentality to continue to do the job. Sometimes that dark humor side allows boundaries to be extremely crossed, because they say things in jest, but they're also things that can be they can hurt, because they poke at certain things like what you were talking about. And I think it's said in jest, it's said in humor, it's said in fun, but in reality it hits a real place in somebody that could be very, very hurtful. And initially they're probably, I would say probably 9 times out of 10, probably not going to say that really hurt. It's probably something that's going to come up later. But I think a lot of times in that dark humor side of things, the boundaries are crossed that wouldn't be crossed in another arena.
No. A healthy relationship respects those boundaries. And
absolutely.
And if you work with a coworker, if you work 12-hour shifts with people and see the worst of the worst, you're going to know those no-go areas.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yep. I think the next thing that when talking about the healthy copy of it is respect. A healthy relationship, you respect the other person. Now, that does not mean that you agree with every single thing they do. Yeah. That doesn't mean that you have a complete understanding and agreement with every decision they make. But I have a mutual respect for that. Respect is different than agreement. And in a healthy relationship, you can treat somebody with respect even if you don't agree with them.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And that is, frankly, in my own life, when people have respected me and yet been able to correct me, that is when all the walls break down. And that's when you begin to build that relational equity. When somebody walks in and they act disrespectfully, they will attack the person, not the problem, or things like that. That's when you get defensive. That's when all that starts to back up. A healthy relationship is able to go in, kind of diffuse the situation, but do that with a heart of respect.
Yeah, and I know another thing that we were mentioning as we were thinking about putting this episode together is just being dependable. It's a key aspect to having a good relationship with our coworkers. That ideally we want to be dependable towards each other, and that we can count on each other to be there. And I know we've seen through the years. For example, I started in Roanoke City, so the zones and districts and whatnot, and every department kind of works that in some form or fashion. And there's times I've seen where there's been a zone that's just been very reliant upon each other, very able to depend on each other in that zone. And it's like, wow, when you see that, it's like, man, these guys are really clicking on all cylinders.
Yep.
And ideally, that's what we all want, right? And so, again, that comes back to the man in the mirror, the woman in the mirror, right? Am I doing what needs to be done? Am I dependable? Am I the one that's setting the example? And if we all, as coworkers, seek to do that, well, it'll work.
Well, and you can take that back to what Gareth was just talking about. If somebody sees that you're dependable, that develops some respect, because there's some respect that's given, but there's other respect that's earned.
Yeah.
And when somebody is dependable, what does it do? It develops your respect for them, right? Because you know that they're going to be there, and you can call on them, you can ask them because they're going to be there, and
Yep.
so you start off with a certain level of respect that's given, but then you have things like dependability that steps in, and then the respect just increases.
Yep, absolutely.
Dependability covers a lot of stuff. I mean, if you're dependable, you may not have all the bells and whistles, and it may not be the funnest guy in the world, but if you're going to be there, man, that's invaluable. And you were mentioning this the other day, Adam. There are the friends that you can call at 2 a.m.
Yep.
And those are the big deals. Like we got to work through something. And there's those just dependable men and women that are going to be there for dinner, for normal relationships.
Yep.
And not just the big ticket items. There are people in our lives that, and when we're talking about this, I hope as we're reflecting, we're looking towards what a healthy relationship looks like. And we're talking from the perspective of, as you're choosing a relationship, this is what it looks like. But we also should be saying, hey, if I am going to be a healthy friend to those around me, am I dependable? Do I have appropriate boundaries? Am I grace-filled?
Yeah.
We all hunger that healthy relationship, but I also should be working on doing that myself.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I ultimately I can't control Adam's actions or Gareth's actions, and what they do, what they say, and that kind of thing. That's not within my boundaries to have any control over. I can only control my actions. So again, am I dependable? Can people count on me? Am I going to be there when to have people sick when I'm needed?
Yep.
Well, I think that sends us right into the next piece of healthy relationships, and that's, we titled it personality considerations. All of these things have all these things come from our personality, right? All these things that we're talking about, are we able to have boundaries? So am I able to give grace? Am I dependable? Those are all parts of, those are, I guess maybe this is a better way to say it, those are reflections of our personality, right? And so, and let's just face it, not everybody jails.
Sure.
Not everybody we work with, or not everybody in our family, we don't get along, or we don't necessarily gel with every single person. So when we're talking about healthy relationships, are we building healthy relationships with people we gel with? Are we building that our personalities, they say, like we'll talk about this later in a different episode, but, in dating relationships, they say opposites attract, a lot of times. But in friendships and relationships, the same can happen, or it could be the fact that, do our personalities, do they gel? Do we share common interests? Are there things about this that because there going to be some people that I naturally gravitate towards, or that people or officers will naturally gravitate towards, but there are others that are not. And part of that is determining those personality things that we get along, and that things that we see things similarly, or we have similar interests, or whatever. And that helps develop healthy relationships with other people that we can share those common interests with, and we can depend on.
So let me ask you this: how do we, when you're in a situation when you're working with 5, 10, 15, 20 other people, you do have to rely on each other, and there might be people that our personalities are really different. How do we maintain that good, healthy relationship when we don't have those common interests and things like that? What does that look like?
Sure. So a really easy example would be if you have introverts and extroverts. So an introvert is by definition, recharged by themselves. They love and crave and need quiet alone time. That is what puts fuel in their tank. An extrovert is someone who does not crave that at all. They want to be in a crowd. They want to be with people. They want to fill their life with social engagements, and that's what adds fuel to their tank. Just a real simple example, if I have a coworker that is introverted, they're going to work with me because they have to. But when we start to have issues is when my extroverted side overpowers and begins to cost them, and vice versa. When I want to go to an event, but they don't because they've used up all their words for the next 6 months and they can't talk to anybody and they want to just sit at their desk. So that's a real simple, easy issue of a personality. How do we interact with that? One would be grace. I have to have an understanding of who they are and what makes them tick. Saw somebody at church here recently, and I looked at their face and I immediately said, the holidays have been rough on them. They are introverted and they sat down and they look like someone took a syringe and just sucked the life out of them. And I went up to them. I was like, hey, you good? They're like, I'm exhausted. I cannot wait for next week to go back to work so I can just be in my cubicle. But I got that. I understood that. I don't need to pick on that. I don't need to whatever with that. But I can understand that, and I can operate with that, and I can give them a little bit of grace in that. If I have issues like, for instance, in working with, there are people that are perfectionists, and then there are people that are slovenly, and I don't know how they fully live in life. But then there's those in between. Someone that's a perfectionist, they're not going to tolerate a messy car. They're not going to tolerate reports that are turned in late. They're not going to tolerate any of that. And so that's going to cause issues. That's fine. That's personality stuff. But communication is often the way to work through that. Hey, I understand that you don't fully care like I do about that. There's nothing wrong with that.
And we can either complement each other with our areas of gifting and strengths, right? Or we can, we have to remember that my strength, if you don't have the same strengths or the same gifting or the same talents, whatever the case may be, my area of strength is going to highlight your weakness in that area, and vice versa. You're going to have strengths that I don't have, and that's going to highlight my weakness. Now we can either, use that against each other. For example, Gareth and his wife Courtney, they really have the gift of hospitality and love to have people at their home, and there's been several times they've done this on a Friday night. Well, that's fantastic. But my wife and I, we have not joined them a lot of times at gatherings that they've had on a Friday night because my wife is just done by the time Friday night rolls around. She's a kindergarten teacher, and a lot of people assume that I'm an extrovert, but I'm really more introverted. I love people, so I serve people. I love being around people, but then I need to unplug. And I need to kind of step away. I can beat a dead horse and like Gareth, like, I'm sorry, buddy. I forbid you to try to do anything in your home under the Shield umbrella on a Friday night or whatever, because I'm not going to be there. Or I can say, hey, that's a strength for he and his wife. Run with it. Do a good job with it. That's awesome. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And can I just say this too? I think there's one root thing that's running underneath all of this, right? That takes us to a place where we get to these places. And that is, there has to be investment in people, right? You've got to make the time, like, to get to know people. You don't know if you're going to jail with somebody and take time to get to know them. Like, you don't know if you're going to class. You don't know if you're going to be able, if this is going to be one of those people that are going to be one of those 3 a.m. people for you, or if they're just going to be a 9 p.m. person for you, until you take time to get to know people. I can't tell you the amount of times I've heard officers say, I just don't have time, to spend getting to know somebody else, well, and you might be in a season where that season that may be the case, but especially for people who don't have a lot of close healthy relationships, and maybe it's the fact that we haven't taken the time to invest to getting to know people to find out is this a relationship something that's would be good for me, that would be healthy for me to have this person in my life. Because if you don't have time to get to know them, if you don't start somewhere, you're never going to know.
Yep. The last two things that we need to talk about with healthy, and then we'll move on to unhealthy. To be a healthy friend or coworker, either to be or to receive that type of relationship, it has to be one of confidentiality. Now, that's big in our world as chaplains and on peer support teams. Confidentiality is one of the things that we hold very, very precious. But I need to be able to trust if I bare my heart with somebody or I'm just not having a good day, then that they call everybody in my zone and be like, hey, Garrett's losing his mess today. I'm sick of it. Let's pick on him. Let's do this. That is not a healthy type relationship. Confidentiality means that when I talk to someone or I'm vulnerable, that it stays there. It doesn't go anywhere else.
Yeah, you want to be able to trust people, right? You want to be able to feel like you can share things knowing they're not going to go any further than that. But at the same token, I know we've all dealt with the fact of saying something to somebody where it's gone to places we wouldn't want it to go. And so, again, that comes part of, what type of friend do you want, and in turn, or relationship do you want? And so, therefore, what type of relationship are you going to offer? So set the standard for what you want.
Yep.
Be the person that you want others to be for you, and then in turn, find those people that are going to do that for you, that are going to be able to say, instead, I'll just use your example. Instead of calling the whole zone and telling them, Garrett's losing his mind today, they're calling you after, about 2 hours after you leave, saying, Garrett, how you doing, man? I just want to make sure you made it home okay. Are you feeling okay? Do you want to get together for some dinner? You want to go to breakfast in the morning? You want to sit down and unpack some of this stuff. That's a good confidential friend who cares to go and to help instead of putting it out everywhere.
And like we kind of hit on this when we talked about friendships and that in a previous episode, but we have to exercise some wisdom there and be careful, some discretion about what we share and who we share it with, and maybe start small, if you will, as you're getting to know somebody, as you're getting to know a coworker. And again, observe what they do with other people's information.
Yeah.
Right.
If they're talking about other people, they're going to talk about you.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so, exercise some discretion there, be kind of move slow with that. But let's face it, when you are working a 12-hour shift or and maybe it's the third day of that long weekend and it's 2:00 in the morning. Sometimes discretion is hard to come by, or you're not, maybe not thinking as sharply as you would at a different time, on your first day. And so you just have to be careful and, again, be the type of person be the type of friend, the type of coworker that you want others, to be.
Yeah.
The last thing is we would want in a healthy relationship, both, again, giving and receiving, is you would want somebody that works through conflict. I don't want a relationship that has no conflict, because that's not going to have any type of resiliency or backbone. I want a relationship that has worked through conflict and we've came out above it on the other side of it. That is something that is precious. It's a gem. Some friendships, some relationships, coworkers will just say, hey, there's a problem. And in our world, in law enforcement, they write off and go to the next and the next and the next and the next. And then you hit retirement and you realize, did I really have no friends? Did I have nobody because you just keep doing that. A good, healthy relationship says, hey, here's what I'm seeing. Let's work through that. And that builds that bond.
Yeah. And we certainly have, I don't know. I'm the old guy in the group, right? You didn't have to look so excited when I said that. But, some of my best friends that I made growing up were guys that that I literally got in a fist fight with, or some sort of fight, some sort of disagreement, conflict. And when we actually started to, after we fought or after we had this disagreement, we started to talk a little bit more. We actually became good friends. And, had I just through the years, now that's kind of the way I grew up. I ain't fights all the time, but some of my closest friends were guys that's how our relationship started. And through the years, there's been several people in my life that maybe we had a disagreement, some sort of conflict that popped up. But when we were able to sit down and really talk through it, in most cases, I was making a mountain out of a molehill kind of thing. It wasn't as big as I thought, in most cases. But when we were able to work through it, man, was that relationship ever strengthened. And, believe it or not, Adam, before you came on board, Gareth and I actually disagreed on a couple of occasions, or maybe we didn't see things eye to eye on a couple of things. And yet we're still able to work together. I love serving alongside Gareth, and I love the things that he brings to the table. Had I written him off, or had he written me off, the first time we had some sort of disagreement, or we got a little snarky in his terminology with each other, this relationship would have ended years ago.
Yeah, you got to push past it.
Yep.
A healthy relationship will do that. Moving into a little bit of the unhealthy on this specific topic, I heard a really, really sad story in one of the circles that we run in, of a relationship that will forever be capped. It will never grow. It will never move past this status, because one person in the relationship decided, I will not deal with this problem. I agree that it's a problem. You agree that it's a problem. But if I do that, it's going to open up a whole can of worms, and I don't want to mess with that. So let's just choose to forget it ever happened. And that's not reality. That's not healthy. That's not good. That booger will fester and blow up and be an atomic bomb in about 2 seconds if you're not careful. And it's sad, because there was previously a healthy relationship there. But because of that one issue, it can't move on.
Yeah. And I learned a long time ago, when you try to just forget stuff, or even if you say, well, I'm just going to forget about this without truly forgiving and bringing some healing to that situation, it's only good until the next reminder comes along. Right?
That's good.
Yeah. And I was actually going to say, when we were on that, one of the things that is a surefire way to look to avoid is you don't want to get into a deep relationship with somebody who always tries to avoid conflict. And that's exactly what you were talking about with that story, because you're not looking for somebody who's constantly looking for conflict, because that's, in those relationships, but you also don't want somebody that constantly wants to avoid it. You got to find that happy medium of somebody who's willing to say, you know what, there's an issue here, but I want to fix it. I want to fix it, and I want to move forward, and I want to be better because of it after the fact. And that's exactly what should happen in that scenario that you were just talking about. But now what's really terrible is now a relationship is, I would say it's even worse than capped, because then what it's done is it's put a very unhealthy wedge. It's not just capped, it's going to affect them forever.
Yep. And that's what the enemy wants to do. You use the term wedge, and kind of the theme of this whole idea of relationships is we're trying to fight division. If God has created us for community, if God has given us battle buddies and trusted friends and coworkers that we can walk through thick and thin with, the stopgap to that is when the devil comes and brings division to that. And if he can divide us up. And the easy thing in all the relationships, and I think we would agree with this despite our personalities, the easy way out is to be a lone ranger and to have no relationship.
Yep.
Just to say, I'm better on my own. I can do it on my own. I understand me. You've said it before. I work pretty good with me. That's the easy way.
Yeah.
And everybody's tempted to do that. And the reason why is because we're scared of what that wedge of an unhealthy relationship can do. And all of us have seen and been a part of either participant on our side or a wound from somebody else to us of an unhealthy relationship. So let's start unpacking. We've just described in brief what a healthy relationship should look like on the coworker side. Let's start talking about what an unhealthy relationship is, and we'll talk about it then. How do we deal with, if I identify that this thing is unhealthy, then what do I do?
I think I accidentally jumped a little ahead when I was talking about the conflict resolution thing, but since we ended there on healthy, one of the thing I just brought up was avoiding conflict, because that is definitely an unhealthy thing. And in turn, it leads to another symptom that's on our list, and we can kind of, I know these are separate, but we can plug them together. Avoiding conflict creates another issue of resentment and tension.
Absolutely.
And that's what I was trying to get at with the example that you gave. Was what happens is not only does it just cap that relationship that they're never going to go further again, but now there's an uneasy tension and a resentment there. Because somebody has said, I recognize the same way you recognize that there's a problem. I'm just unwilling to do anything about it. So now, like, the person who now is sitting on the other end of that saying, look, we figured out there's a problem, but you're unwilling to do anything about it. Like, that's going to put some resentment in their heart towards that person that is not going to can never be resolved unless that person decides, hey, we probably should work through this, And so that tension is always going to exist. That resentment's always going to exist. There's nothing anybody's going to be able to do about it, even in forgiveness. Because let's just face it, when Jesus was asked about forgiveness, he said 7 times 70. It wasn't about 490 times. It was about forgiving over and over again, because this stuff creeps back in over and over again. Even if that person chooses to forgive them for what's happened, there's going to be a conversation. There's going to be a time. There's going to be a day they just wake up and they're going to be mad about it again, because I can't believe that we're still here. I can't believe that we recognize there's a problem and we're still here, and so that resentment and that tension continues to build, and all because somebody chose to avoid conflict, and it creates and now that relationship is extremely unhealthy.
Yeah, it becomes toxic, becomes backbiting and evil, and that is totally not healthy.
And we've all seen, if we can jump from that, we've all seen how that can spread to others. When we're talking about a workplace situation, how the bleed over, and that bleed over often happens through gossip.
Yep.
And isn't it crazy how fast that happens, especially in this world?
It is. It absolutely is. And I know oftentimes women get a bad rap for being the gossipers, and men have nothing to do with gossip.
Yeah, right.
That's just simply not true.
Yeah.
False.
It couldn't be further from the truth, actually, especially in this realm,
Yeah, men will just say, well, I just was warning somebody. Yeah. I just was giving them a heads up.
Yeah.
That's a fun way to spread gossip.
Yeah.
Did that situation have anything to do with you? Was it actually going to affect you? No.
And even if it did have something to do with them, what's the point of telling everybody else about it?
Yeah.
To me, and y'all correct me if you think I'm wrong, but to me, that's a surefire way to hurt the other person that's involved. Because not only is there this problem between the two of you, but now you've spread that out to everybody else, and they're only hearing your side. And look, let's just face it, there's going to be people that only take in what you say, and they're going to immediately make a judgment call about that person. Yep. And they're going to see them differently because of what you said to them. And that's very unfair. Yep. That's extremely unfair.
It's very polarized.
It is.
You absolutely have to decide at that moment, who do I agree with? And that is typically why somebody will share that.
Yeah.
Hey, just so you know, Darren did this last week. And you have to make a decision right now whose side you're going to be on. That's why that's shared, and that's not healthy.
I know one thing, and I'm sure you guys feel this way, especially as a chaplain, when we have officers coming to us talk to us, when they're sharing things with me about a situation with someone else, the one thing that always goes through my head is, I'm only hearing their side.
Yep. There's another side of the coin always.
What the reality is, and we know this and especially, let's talk about just for 1 second, when we meet with couples, you listen to one side, and you listen to the other side, and then we have to discern somewhere in the middle where the truth of what's taking place actually happens. The same applies even in workplace relationships. So the problem is we usually don't get both sides because only that one person is sharing. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times we don't get the chance to talk to the other person. So you got to make a conscious choice when somebody's saying this stuff to say, look, I'm only hearing what they have to say. I'm not saying that what they're saying is not true. I'm just saying, like, I don't know, because I don't know what the other person is, and I shouldn't make a judgment call based off only hearing one side of the story.
It's very, very unhealthy.
Yep.
I was at a funeral here recently of somebody who gossiped, and and it ended badly. No, I'm just kidding. They, no, they,
Dang.
Yeah, no, that escalated. No, is that a funeral? And
I was not expecting that.
The pastor said this, talking about the person. I never had heard them, and this person was 80 some years old. I've never heard them in 80 some years speak a sour word about anybody.
Wow. Man.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a testimony, man.
That will not be said of me.
I've already messed that up.
Sorry. Yeah. I've messed that up.
Yeah, me too.
But that, and I just sat there and thought, what a really good quality. I bet they were a great friend.
Yeah.
Because they saw all the stupidity. They weren't ignorant.
Yeah.
They didn't hide underneath a rock. They didn't avoid all of it. They just chose not to talk about it. There's plenty of other good stuff to talk about, and they would not entertain anything sour about anybody. That is healthy. We're talking about unhealthy, and that would be the gossip, the spreading it around, making jokes about it. We've already talked about it, but the avoiding the conflict, just totally sidestepping issues, just breezing past it.
Well, and what is the biblical standard when it comes to the things that we're saying to each other?
Yeah.
It's like, is it useful for encouraging and building up the other person?
Absolutely.
If we'll take the time to ask that question, and before we speak, which, how often do we speak without thinking? But if we'll actually take a step back and think through, okay, is what I'm about to share actually going to be useful, helpful, uplifting in some way?
Yeah.
I actually had a situation where I watched two friends interact, and I was just somewhat of a third party, just happened to be in the room. And as the one person walked out of the room, I looked at the guy that was sitting there that was still remaining, and I said, that was hurtful. You just hurt them. And I'll forever remember their response. I know, I meant to.
Oh, gosh.
And I thought, that was your goal? When that person walked in the room, your first thought was, I need to hurt them. That is not healthy.
Yeah.
That is not something I want to be a part of my life. I have plenty of things that will hurt me, whether self-inflicted or external. I don't need a friend to do that.
Yeah.
I need someone that will choose not to hurt me.
I hate to even use the term friend with somebody that would do that, because a true friend doesn't do that.
Mm-mm.
That is not a friend. That's I don't know. I'm not sure what we would call that, but to me, that's not a friend.
It's abusive.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah.
Very, very unhealthy.
Yeah.
Kind of throwing along the last couple things. One of the things that we would say is unhealthy is when you have, and you hit it a little bit earlier, Darren, when we jump the equity levels.
Yes.
In relationships, we have equity levels. And if you notice, a very simple analogy is when I introduce myself, I say, hi, my name's Gareth. And you will say, hey, nice to meet you. My name is blank. What are you doing? You're sharing just a little bit about yourself. It would be wildly inappropriate for you to say, hi, my name is blank. Here is my routing number.
Yeah. No kidding.
Yeah. How do you? My wife has my routing number. We happen to share that account.
Well, people call me a lot and ask for that. But
yeah. Don't do that. That's like an extended warranty.
I shouldn't have given those out.
Nope,
No,
you should
yeah,
not.
bad idea.
That was unhealthy, Darren.
Yeah.
My bad.
Definitely unhealthy.
We better check the Shield account.
Yeah. Podcast over. But an unhealthy relationship jumps those equity boundaries. And so the funny analogy of the checking account and the routing numbers, I hope we can understand that. When you jump into a relationship and the first time you meet somebody, they begin to share their deepest, darkest moments with you. We want vulnerable in a relationship. We want someone who's going to be honest and real and genuine. But some of those things, you're going to have to wait a little bit. If I've just met you within 30 seconds, I know all of your marital history. I know what you just talked to your wife about this morning. I know your family history and the history of abuse and this and that, and your diagnosis and the bump on the back of your leg that's itching. We've jumped all sorts of weird boundaries here. An unhealthy relationship understands the boundary and the playing field that we're on, and operates on that and will patiently wait. Had another situation where friends, several years, were friends with each other, and working together, amicable, all good. And one part of the friend wanted to jump really, really far down that path. And the other one, because of history and baggage and whatever, actually told this person, I'm not ready for that. And the response was, well, you're not truly a friend. And they blocked them,
Wow.
deleted their number, never again.
Wow.
So that is not healthy. We got to respect each other's boundaries and equity and work in that.
Yeah, and especially if we're talking about coworkers, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about coworkers. And we don't want to discourage you if you need to talk about those deepest, darkest things. Well, guess what? That's why we have chaplains. That's part of why we're here. We need safe people to go to unload sometimes. What we're saying is just exercise a little discretion here, and let's slow down a little bit and make sure that what we're about to share is something that should be shared with that coworker. All right. Maybe that person, you have built that kind of equity in that relationship. You have that kind of relationship where you can do that, but that is something you need to just be very, very cautious with, and start small, and trust them with the small stuff. And as you get to know each other, as they have proven to be someone who is dependable and will keep things in confidence and that kind of thing, well, then maybe share a little bit more.
Yep.
That's all we're saying with that.
And while we're talking about relational equity and being cautious, I think that we've got to hit on the unhealthy side of opposite sex emotional ties, bond relationships amongst coworkers, because this is hard, because in this community, this is a real problem. You know, we all know that this is an issue, but there is just, using the term boundary, there is a line between, you know, male and female relationships that are just not supposed to be crossed. It is a very definitive line. It is not, we shouldn't ever get anywhere near that line. But unfortunately, what happens in this line of work, because especially, and we were talking about this before we started recording, when a spouse, especially for those that are married or in relationships with someone, they go home to someone who doesn't understand what their line of work is, doesn't understand what they go through on a daily basis, but they have members of the opposite sex that they do work with that do understand what they go with. It's okay to have workplace relationships, but it is not okay to cross that line, even in that realm of needing somebody to talk to, because you should never be able to talk to someone of the opposite sex about something that you can't talk to your spouse about. You know, that line should never, ever be crossed. And unfortunately, what happens is these emotional ties, these emotional bonds that are developed between people, they oftentimes end up leading to other things, and that's why you never even get close to that line, because once you cross that line, at that point, pretty much anything's fair game, at least per your emotions, because your emotions are always going to be late to the party, and they're always going to deceive you to what's right and what's wrong.
Yep. Thinking about this line of work in specific with those boundaries, it is certainly unhealthy to have that deep of an emotional relationship with somebody from the opposite sex. And it can be very easy. Thinking about my life and the work partners that I've had, I will work with somebody from the opposite sex, and for 12 hours, we're fighting the most evil of evil. I'm getting chills even talking about it. The things that we have interacted with, the hurt, the pain, and then I go home to somebody who's lived in the house all day, who has not experienced that. There's a bond there. When that person walks in the room, we immediately connect because of what we have gone through. There's nothing wrong with that. What is wrong with that is when I'm having a bad day, I call, I'm going to use air quotes here, my work wife, and I start to offload to my work wife things that are going on. That's not okay.
Yeah.
That is an inappropriate and unhealthy relationship, and I have to begin to unpack that. One of the lines that I typically follow is I let my wife help me through that. So I will explain, hey, we have went through this today, and I'm feeling connected because of that. I feel comfortable with that. What are some boundaries? And from the lady's perspective, she'll tell me, hey, don't call her all the time. You're work with her 12 hours a day. You don't need to call her in the house. You don't need to text her. Okay, I didn't think about that. You're right, I should not. I wouldn't call random ladies. I wouldn't talk to them, but I would my work partner. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. I see it now. Let them kind of guide and direct that, and vice versa.
Yeah, and I was going to say, part of the reason our spouses or those that we're in a serious relationship with do not understand what we're going through is because we don't talk about what we're going through with them. We in these circles so often want to leave work at work and home at home, so we think. But our spouses or those that we're in a long-term relationship with or serious relationship with, they want to know more about what we do and what we face, what we're going through and facing. We just need to learn to communicate, and that's another episode. We can get into those sort of things, but our spouses, even if they do something totally different than law enforcement or dispatching or whatever the case may be, they don't have to understand every detail of something in order to emotionally connect with you and help you walk through a difficult day or a difficult situation from work.
And I don't think there's one thing that I personally feel like in my conversations have been, I think a lot of times officers don't realize how deeply their spouses want to be that in their life. Like, and they feel shut out a lot of times because they don't share, because they don't talk. And I, even as a chaplain, with the things I see when I'm out on patrol with officers, there are certain things that I don't tell my wife because I don't think it's good for her. But I do share other things. I never share anything that I talk about with officers in confidence. Nothing like that. But sometimes she asks me about the things I see, and my kids ask me about things I see, and I have to determine what's the line, the things that I can share with them, because they are interested and I want them a part of that. But there are some things for their protection I probably shouldn't tell them. But I think that, again, my wife and my kids are very good about saying, honey, what happened today at work? What did you experience today at work? And my kids like, Dad, what kind of calls did y'all run today? So I've determined the things I can tell them and the things that I can't tell, that I shouldn't tell them. Yep. And then that needs to be the same thing for officers, because, again, I think more often than not, they don't realize how deeply their spouses or their significant others want to be that person for them in their life, and they feel like they're protecting them, but what they're really doing is shutting them out.
Yeah, let your spouse be your safe place.
Yes, absolutely.
That's a healthy marriage. Each spouse is going to be that safe place for the other, and that's what we're talking about with this. Not building that emotional bond with someone of the opposite sex that's a coworker that they'll understand things and that kind of thing, but when you start building those emotional bonds, it blurs the line so very quickly, and that will take you down a path, if unbelievably quickly at times, to a place that will absolutely wreck your marriage if it's allowed to. And even if you're not married or in a serious relationship, when you start forming those kind of bonds, it just doesn't lead long term to something good. There may be a short term, like, woo, that was good, but that doesn't last.
Nope. Another thing to think about too is, and we see the very bad damage of that almost on a weekly basis. Yep. And we have to help people unpack that they let their work relationships get out of check, and those boundaries were blurred, and now they're trying to unpack that, and we are happy to walk with people through those. Don't hear me say that, but it can be easily safeguarded by saying, hey, this is not appropriate. This is a very dangerous area. One of the things in talking with somebody about this recently is, I don't think that they understood, but you can have an emotional affair. Yep. Which means that nothing sexual, nothing that is across the line in that regard, but I have emotionally made a connection with somebody that is not my significant other. That's unhealthy. Yeah. So that's a whole different topic of relationships. We're going to talk about dating and marriage. But in terms of what healthy and unhealthy is, we've unpacked a little bit of that.
Yeah, and there's a second half of this that we want to talk about, but I think what we're going to have to do is I think we're going to have to take that into another episode. This one ran a little longer than we were anticipating. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to invite you to tune in back with us next week, and we want to hit a second half of this. We're going to break this now. Originally, it was going to be one episode. We're going to take it to 2 episodes, and we want to talk about, now that we've unpacked healthy and unhealthy relationships, what do we do with that?
Yeah.
How do we, where do we take that to? What do we do with that? And 2, what do we do with that in the realm of our supervisors and our command staff? Because I think as officers that are listening, you need to be thinking about what does this look like in the realm of not just the people that I'm arm in arm with, but the people who are above me, and how do I respond to that? So we want to invite you to tune back in with us next week, and we're going to be hitting those things, and we look forward to seeing you guys back again next week.